Prime Minister Mark Carney outlined his big bet on electrification today, a plan to double generation and double the grid by 2050. And it's a push that's key to Carney's industrial goals and will play a role in reducing emissions, he says. But it comes as an earlier big bet on electrification appears to be failing, with Honda confirming today that it suspended its EV expansion plans for Canada indefinitely. And all of this comes the day before the Prime Minister and Alberta Premier Daniel Smith are set to outline a major energy deal at an event in Calgary. This MOU, this agreement, will establish a compromise on industrial carbon pricing and allow Smith to advance her pipeline dreams to the next step. So another slow week for our reporter Roundtable, who joins us now. We've got Aaron Weir, he's a senior writer with CBC Politics. Mia Rabson is the Deputy Parliamentary Bureau Chief at the Canadian Presse. And Robert Fife, Bob, is the Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Globe and Mail. Sometimes I wonder, Bob, as the week starts, like, what are we going to talk about? And then we get to Thursday, it's like, oh, there's a bunch of things we couldn't even get to. The electrification plan rolled out today, another big, ambitious strategic revamp of the industrial scope of the country, the environmental policy of the country. What do you make of what we heard from the Prime Minister?
Well, there's a lot of stuff missing there, obviously. How do we get there, and who's paying for it?
Right.
And
but other than that, and who's going to build it?
On top of that, what they didn't answer is that we're actually going to need even more electricity, because we're going to need more power for the AI data centers that we're going to be having. We're going to have critical minerals and processing that's going to require, up in the north particularly, how do we get electrification in there, or do we do small nuclear reactors? Regardless of what happened with Honda, batteries supply chains are going to be the future of in the 21st century, and none of those things have been explained. But I'll give him a little bit of leeway here, is because we know in September he's going to have a very summit on investment. And clearly, I would assume that this is trying to bring international investors in to look at ways to not only fund pipelines, but to fund electrical grids, nuclear energy, and all of this sort of stuff. So lots of unanswered questions. We may get some answers in the fall when we have this big summit of international investors.
If you're one of the Gulf states or one of those big sovereign wealth funds and you want to get away from your reliance on fossil fuels, buying into hydro lines and hydro projects and transmission lines, that's the kind of annuity you're looking for to replace those.
Yeah, and we're seeing in Ontario, for example, Ontario is leading the way in these small nuclear reactors, which can be if they work properly, can be a really important source of energy to do things like steel mills or critical mineral and processing plants, that sort of stuff.
Yes, you can get non-emitting power into remote areas. So Mia, look, we're going to need a lot of energy. That's very clear. 130,000 jobs in this defense industrial capacity build up, double the rate of housing, major projects initiative, minor projects initiative, pet projects initiatives. There's a whole lot of tradespeople that are going to be needed that do not exist right now. And the $6 billion in the spring economic update is not going to solve it on its own.
I mean, build, baby, build. Isn't that what we're doing?
Train, baby, train, right?
Train, baby, train. I mean, they have been making a lot of noise about needing to train people more for the skilled trades, sort of ushering people to sort of consider that as a career option in ways that maybe we haven't been highlighting in the last maybe several decades. But there is not a coherent strategy on this yet. I mean, the $6 billion, it's not a small amount of money, but it's not going to go very far. It's not going to stretch very far. And to say we're going to suddenly hire 30,000 people, I think he said by 2028 in the electricity sector, we're already shy of workers in that sector, and we need to double and triple this sector over the next 25 years. And we're going to suddenly find 30,000 people to work on it in the next 2 years, if my math is correct, or less than 2 years. So I don't know. There's a lot of questions. I mean, the money, the workers, the time, the materials, and also exactly what we're going to build. He's talking a lot about new gas or upgrading gas on a on a scale that was not anticipated before. He's rolling back some of the requirements on gas plants. So there's a lot of questions. It was sort of amusing to me that he promised that this was going to come in, I think it was early March. And we waited almost 8 weeks for us to now be told we're now waiting another 4 months because they still have to consult on. It's not really a plan. It's just sort of an outline of this is kind of where we want to go. Now we got to figure out how to get there.
Right. So, Aaron, and there's still a lot of things to fill in. The execution is obviously going to be critical. And to use the Prime Minister's own words, he says, the scale is huge, the timeline is short, and if we get it wrong, Canadians will pay higher utilities bills. No pressure, Mark Carney.
Yeah, it's a big lift. Look, the Canadian Climate Institute has flagged, going back years now, that you're going to have to double the size of the grid, and you have to continue to get it to 100% clean electricity. And a lot of times people focus on the fact that right now the national grid is about 80% clean. But that really kind of ignores some pretty stark differences across provinces. Provinces like Alberta and Saskatchewan are way, way short of being anywhere near 100% clean.
Yeah, Quebec's doing a lot of lifting there.
Yeah, Ontario too. And so, it is a big lift. I think what they released today, I know the Carney government doesn't like to talk about the Trudeau government anymore, but this does build a fair bit on some work that was left behind by John Wilkinson and Stephen Guilbeault. I think as much as the stakes are big, as much as the lift is big, the difference on the electricity file is that, it's unlike regulations or carbon pricing where you're talking about restrictions and how much prices people are going to pay. This is something that you can kind of build out as a big, ambitious project that isn't necessarily going to punish anyone going forward. Not that it's not going to be hard, not that there aren't going to be costs. The federal government's going to have to put up a lot of money. But you can see it as, I think, politically, a more positive discussion than maybe we've had when it comes to climate policy sort of over the last 10 years.
Right. So the through line in a lot of this today, Bob, was focus on the outcomes. Like, yes, we're not going to be completely...
Yeah, we'd like to see some outcomes, actually.
Yes.
That's what Canadians are asking for.
I hear you. I'm building to something, though. Like, there's going to be a natural gas component to this, which is a shift from where the previous administration wanted to go. And, Mark Carney's always said, like, we have to adapt, we have to change. And tomorrow, or if you're listening to this on the podcast, it might have already happened by now. They're going to move even further on this agreement, this MOU with Daniel Smith in Alberta. There's compromise coming in both directions on the industrial carbon price. But here it is, the second Liberal Prime Minister in a row getting behind, in some way, the idea of another pipeline.
Look, Mr. Carney is realistic enough to understand that we need to get world oil prices for our oil. And after what's happened in the Strait of Hormuz, everybody understands that Canada is a place that is secure and dependable. We failed because we only have the one oil pipeline to the west coast, which is TMX, and we are going to get another pipeline. What we don't know, the same kind of answers, is who's paying for it. Right. I suspect that the Canadian government will end up, maybe through the Sovereignty Fund, will have to pay for a significant amount of this pipeline. And I suspect that the $10 billion that has gone to Indigenous groups, communities, so that they can buy into these infrastructure projects, that will be money. And then they're going to have to find a private sector proponent who's willing to put up some money too. The industry is now saying that they want the pipeline, and maybe they would put up money, but we haven't really, they haven't walked to the gate and said, here's the cash. So
they want as much de-risking
they want,
up front as possible, right? That is capitalism in Canada, is it not?
But it's still a positive development that Alberta can't complain that this government isn't listening to them. This is a government that's listening to Alberta. This is a government that's listening to the business community, that's saying, we need you to take regulations away. We need to create an investment environment, so that we can get these kind of products to international markets. And he's sending that signal.
He is sending that signal, but the investors looking for de-risking. I will remind us that with the Trans Mountain Pipeline, we bought that pipeline to de-risk, and it wasn't about regulation at that point. It was to de-risk the opponents and the opposition to it that the private sector wasn't willing to take on. And that opposition was because of concerns about the consultation process and whether or not it was going to have impacts on the environment. And so some of these changes that have happened in the last week, particularly the changes to the Major Projects Review process and the Impact Assessment Act, there are a lot of people who are saying it's just going to reopen. We're going to end up back in court. So there might not be regulations that are going to stop necessarily, but the courts are now going to be called on to weigh in, and that also slows things down. So this country has not been good at building big things in the last, like, ever, maybe since maybe the railroad.
Skydome. That was the last big one.
And one of the reasons is we have not been able to figure out that sort of, the sweet spot between the opposition, the environment, Indigenous consultation,
And the provinces.
and the provinces and the investments. Like it's a big ask, and we still haven't figured it out.
But I think the mood of the public has changed because of what's happened south of the border. There's a real realization in this country that we just can't sit on our hands anymore, that we have to actually do stuff.
And there might be more demand for Canadian oil in a way that didn't exist previous to the war in Iran, which does change some of the business cases as well.
Yeah, look, the TMX thing too, there was this border war between John Horgan and Rachel Notley that Justin Trudeau had to buy the pipeline to resolve. David Eby, Aaron says he accepts jurisdiction on this, where they can't stop it. He lives with he was, I think, the Justice Minister, Attorney General when that all happened. So there can be political opposition, but they know they can't stop it legally. So what do you expect to hear in this compromise tomorrow? Because it's a move to accepting a higher industrial carbon price than is currently in place in Alberta by Daniel Smith, and a move to what is there probably a lower one than was needed in the original plans by Mark Carney. So they're each making like a king-size bed with queen-size sheets here, given a little bit in one direction.
Hadn't really thought of that before. Yeah, look, I think we're going to get obviously a deal on industrial carbon pricing. I think you're right that the trade-off to be weighed is he may get a higher effective price, but on a slower schedule. The emissions reductions are not going to be what might have been projected under the previous policy. You can make the argument that even if this is a weaker policy on paper to what was left behind by the Trudeau government, that this is a more secure policy because it has more political buy-in now. Maybe you can get Saskatchewan, who had frozen or had essentially repealed their price, to come back into the fold. Maybe you now have political buy-in on industrial carbon pricing that's really durable. I think the next questions, though, are, okay, so what does this mean for the pipeline and what does this mean for pathways? Because we have been told that the pipeline can't happen if pathways doesn't happen. So is the oil industry now going to move forward on pathways? Like, are they ready to put something in writing or act to make that happen? And is that going to clear the way for a pipeline? And if pathways isn't going to happen, or if the oil industry continues to sort of be reluctant to move forward on pathways, is Mark Carney going to be willing to say, well, then I'm not going to get on board with a pipeline? It seems to me that there's still some pretty big, heavy questions.
He did kind of say today, though, no pipeline, no pathways,
yeah, exactly.
No pathways, no pipeline. Like he repeated it on the eve of going to Calgary to
Absolutely, he said it. It's in the MOU. But I'm interested now to see, given the oil industry has been raising concerns about industrial carbon pricing, if there's now a deal on industrial carbon pricing, what is the oil industry's reaction to whatever gets announced tomorrow, and do they further commit to pathways? Is there any sign that we're getting anywhere on pathways? Because if the pipeline is contingent on pathways, if we're sticking with that, then it has to be both or neither.
Yeah, but we haven't made any of our emission targets, let's be honest.
And we're not going to meet the next one.
We keep making these great emission targets, but we never meet them.
We're on track for 2030, though, until things like the repealing of the consumer carbon, like they were. For the first, I know they hadn't hit it, but it was moving there.
Well, they're moving. They're getting close.
It's still 4 years away.
Pre-April 28th, 2025, we were on track.
Oh, no,
they have repealed the consumer carbon price alone. Taking that out of the equation, you're no longer on track.
I suspect that pathways will go along the same ways as emission targets. We're going to get there. Well, not this year, but...
Yeah, a lot. Look, they keep saying they're committed to the targets. Yeah. Sure. I'm committed to my diet as I overeat every day, right? It's just not the same thing, right?
He also said today that they're looking at reducing emissions 250 to 300 million tons over the next 25 years. We need to reduce almost that much over the next 4 years. if we're going
Yes.
to meet the 2030 target. So
Yes,
he
well,
did
well, that's
seem,
what electrification can
but-
displace in energy
he
for
did
industry.
seem to be moving the needle a little, even if he denied he was.
Yeah. So look, a lot of needle moving there, and this is all happening, Aaron, in the backdrop of a push to have a referendum on separatism that got quashed by the courts. We spoke with Jeffrey Rath. We heard from Premier Daniel Smith. They say the judge is wrong. They're going to appeal it. They want to push ahead with it. We all know that Justin Trudeau got such a political bounce in Alberta from TMX. I mean, how do we think this MOU is going to play? How it feeds into that whole separatist conversation that is happening in the middle of a data breach of all things?
Yeah, I don't think an MOU, I don't think a pipeline, to your point, can solve the issue of the referendum or the general, I guess, anger that exists in certain places in Alberta. I think it at least sends the message, or at least shows people that the federal government and the Alberta government can work together, that the federal government is trying to work with Alberta, that the federal government is not standing in the way of a pipeline. I think it doesn't, at the very, very least, it doesn't add to the case for breaking away from Canada.
Right.
And I guess to that extent, I think there will be questions about whether Mark Carney has sacrificed too much, has compromised already too much. I think the best argument against that would be, well, it's worth it if it keeps the country together. But it's not, whatever they announce tomorrow, whatever they announce on a pipeline going forward, it's still going to be a risky and nervy 6 months. And there's still going to be a lot that's going to have to be done to win that referendum for the Federalist side.
It just seems to me that there are just so many fires flaring up in Alberta, political fires, right? With the data breach and the lack of cooperation, and then this court decision today stops the process, but it can inflame the whole movement, right? Like it's a tough situation they're walking into with this on Friday.
I mean, anytime somebody is threatening to pick up their ball and go home, it's it's a threat that in this particular case, you have to take it seriously. I think maybe they didn't take it seriously enough, early enough, and we've sort of gone down the road to this process to a point now where things are getting a little bit more real. The court case today really, I think, has just inflamed the people who are behind the referendum in the first place. And the federal government has to be really careful. But I mean, this Prime Minister has probably done more to try and make Alberta understand that Ottawa's listening in the last week than any Prime Minister in the last maybe 15, 20 years, if not longer. You have, they wanted to get rid of the Impact Assessment Act. The Act still exists, but the big parts of it that were impacting pipelines and transmission lines and things like that, going back essentially to the way it was before. Now you also have the electricity regulations, the industrial carbon price, the consumer carbon price that he got rid of, all of these things that were large irritants and that were sort of thrown against the wall. The only thing that's standing there now that they haven't gotten rid of, and I say yet, is the tanker ban off of the west coast of British Columbia, which they've also hinted might go away if there's a pipeline.
Or be amended and these
in
sorts of
some
things.
ways.
Bob,
I'm just going to say, he's done a lot to sort of court Alberta, but the question still is it going to be enough? And it seems like there won't be enough because they'll just never trust Ottawa.
Look, it's never going to be enough with these separatists. And unfortunately, Premier Smith lit the match, and it's burning everywhere around her, and it might engulf her as well. And if she was smart, and I don't think she's smart enough to do this, she should simply say, if you want to separate, form a political party, run an election, just like the Parti Québécois does, and run on a platform of separating Alberta from the rest of the country. And if you get in, then you can do your referendum. But holding these referendums are bad ideas in parliamentary democracies, in my personal opinion. But significantly, if you feel this way, then run a political party in an election campaign, which, by the way, they have done on 2 or 3 occasions,
not done well.
And they have done like 1.7 or 2% of the vote.
Well, this was Jason Kenney's argument, or is Jason Kenney's argument as well. But they are the separatists, and Jeff Rath said it on the show. They'll take over the UCP. They'll go in, sign up, they'll force her out, and they will take over a party that exists as a more profitable vehicle for them.
These guys talk a good game. They're maybe 25% or 20% of that UPC party. They can't take over the UPC party. They can cause her a lot of problems, for sure, and they are causing a lot of problems. Right. But, where's the Margaret Thatcher in Premier Daniel Smith? We don't see it. If she says she's an admirer of Margaret Thatcher, well, the Iron Lady would have just told these people, get lost.
Aaron, I mean, how do you think they approach this, going in there? Because the two of them will be together signing this, and the backdrop will be, an interesting one.
Yeah, I mean, I think my sense from the Prime Minister today in his comments on the referendum is that he is, not backing away from the question, but not fully embracing it and elbows up.
It's not on the ballot yet, right? It hasn't been certified.
There's no vote, there's no campaign. And I also think, as much as he's from Alberta, and we'll advertise that plenty in the next few months, I don't know that he's necessarily the guy you want leading the fight against this referendum. I think you probably want someone from Alberta, literally in Alberta at this moment, waging that campaign. So I think he's going to something that Jason Kenney's kind of emphasized, the Federalist side does have to get in the game at some point, and I think the Prime Minister will have to at some point get in the game.
Absolutely.
But I think at this point, the best contribution he can make is to simply show up in Alberta and sign a memorandum of understanding with the Premier. I think that is in itself the best argument he can make.
So, Mia, we've got about 20 seconds left. Is that what do you think? Is that the play right now, to keep putting proof points on the table? We hear you, we're responding, look at what we can do together?
Absolutely, and it has the benefit of him also talking about building big for the economy and making Canada sort of sovereign on its energy. So he can sort of sell that back to the rest of the country at the same time.
Okay, well, I hear you all. I'm responding to you, and we can all work together every Thursdays and Fridays on the podcast. Aaron filling in for JD on the Reporter Roundtable. Aaron Weary, Robert Fife, and Mia Rabson, thank you all so much.